Emotions and reasoning. For my RLS, I decided to look at environmental consciousness versus money as it pertains to products that are disposable and biodegradable. So, obviously, climate change is a really big issue right now that's being discussed in a lot of different places in education and among scientific professions. So, there's also a growing concern revolving around it in social media. So, of course, being more environmentally conscious and making an effort to try and slow down climate change and just do our part individually is really important. And something that's kind of happened as a result of that is all of these new products and new foods and just new ways of consuming that are supposedly more environmentally friendly. So there is an issue with that as far as expense and being able to afford things like organic foods and bamboo toothbrushes, which can be really expensive to replace as often as a regular plastic toothbrush needs to be replaced, even though their duration is still about the same amount of time. And things like metal straws and shopping at Whole Foods where the cost is a lot more significant. This is a lot to do with social media because the influencers who promote those products often are making a lot of money, so it's associated with wealthy culture. It's also higher quality, so of course it's going to cost more. So it becomes an issue of whether or not your money should be spent solely on that, helping the planet and overall environment, or whether you should be saving your money towards things like college and retirement, which can add up with those higher prices, as seen in the chart comparing Whole Foods and Safeway. So, my KQ is, how do our emotions affect our reasoning when making decisions? This relates back to my RLS in the sense of whether or not our duty or responsibility towards the planet and the greater good is going to be stronger than the emotions we have towards saving money for a child to go to college or to retire in the future, or the immediate gratification of buying something you really want or spending money on going out with a friend. Whether or not the emotions towards those significant, closer relationships are more important than the greater good. So, the ways of knowing that my KQ relates to are emotion for the personal relationships and caring for the people of the planet and the planet itself, and reasoning and how emotion goes into the choices that we make in either big decisions or small everyday decisions. So then the areas of knowledge that my KQ pertains to are natural sciences as far as how it affects the globe and the people who live in it, and then mathematics just for the sake of money in my RLS, and ethics and people's responsibility towards helping the entire human race or helping those who are closest and most important to them. My claim is that emotions are often the result of personal connections and relationships. On a daily basis, this will seem more important to an individual than the greater good, especially with small decisions like in the RLS purchases that are environmentally sound or more cost efficient. So then for my evidence, I'm using the trolley problem, and there's a quick TED Talk explaining what that is.
Always take the utilitarian view, which we can see by changing the trolley problem a bit. This time, you're standing on a bridge over the track as the runaway trolley approaches. Now there's no second track, but there is a very large man on the bridge next to you. If you push him over, his body will stop the trolley, saving the 5 workers, but he'll die. To utilitarians, the decision is exactly the same. Lose 1 life to save 5. But in this case, only about 10% of people say that it's okay to throw the man onto the tracks. Our instincts tell us that deliberately causing someone's death is different than allowing them to die as collateral damage. It just feels wrong, for reasons that are hard to explain. This intersection between ethics and psychology is...
As the TED Talk shows, when a person is faced with the direct decision of pushing the person off of the bridge, most people chose not to do it. This could be the result of several things, but ultimately it's seen that killing someone is bad and that you shouldn't do it, and especially the guilt that goes along with that is something that people would try to avoid. So in that moment where that's the decision that they have to make, they choose the person whose actions is going to most directly relate to them, and it would be easier in that moment to not do anything because the person wouldn't want to live with that guilt. This has its flaws because obviously the person would be less likely to push the person off if they knew the person on the bridge with them, and would probably be more likely to push the person off if they knew someone in the train who was important to them who was going to die. So that just goes to show that those personal emotional connections and your own sense of guilt and wanting to do what's right can greatly affect your decisions and prevent you from doing something that you think is horrible, or push you to do something that you think is horrible in order to protect someone who's important to you and who you have an emotional connection to. However, utilitarianism makes the case that the greater good is more important than personal relationships or one person's life because it saves more people. Logically, it would be better to save the highest possible number of people to avoid that emotion of guilt and to save the most people, providing the most safety, which would be an overall benefit for the group. This is a continuation of the previous TED Talk that speaks a little bit of the opposite side of the trolley problem.
Imagine you're watching a runaway trolley barreling down the tracks, straight towards 5 workers who can't escape. You happen to be standing next to a switch that will divert the trolley onto a second track. Here's the problem. That track has a worker on it too, but just one. What do? Do you sacrifice one person to save 5? This is the trolley problem, a version of an ethical dilemma that philosopher Philippa Foot devised in 1967. It's popular because it forces us to think about how to choose when there are no good choices. Do we pick the action with the best outcome, or stick to a moral code that prohibits causing someone's death? In one survey, about 90% of respondents said that it's okay to flip the switch, letting one worker die to save 5. And other studies, including a virtual reality simulation of the dilemma, have found similar results. These judgments are consistent with the philosophical principle of utilitarianism, which argues that the morally correct decision is the one that maximizes well-being for the greatest number of people. The 5 lives outweigh 1, even if achieving that outcome requires condemning someone to death. But people don't.
You can see here that when the person isn't going to have to directly harm someone, they are much more likely to quickly decide to sacrifice the individual as opposed to sacrificing the group. They're more emotionally removed from it because they're pushing a switch instead of pushing a person. Again, this might not be the case if the one person on the track who they're going to run over is someone who's very close to them. That certainly changes things, but it's seen that when someone is a little more emotionally removed, they are willing to sacrifice someone really easily. So you can see both sides of the argument in the sense that on the side of logic, where someone's reasoning is less emotional, they are able to save more people regardless of the cost of sacrificing one person, because it makes more sense to save the group rather than save the individual, and that's through the perspective of utilitarianism. However, on the side of a more emotionally involved dilemma, people are more inclined to protect their conscience, and they lean towards favoritism in those they care about. And that comes from the perspective of love and emotional connections with someone. This can work in a few other situations. One is self-driving cars, which is really similar to the original trolley problem. As these self-driving cars are being brought out, there's the discussion of what they would do in an accident if both ways would cause an accident, whether or not it would be right to put that decision in the hand of a machine rather than in the hand of a person, because of that emotional removal, where maybe the car would drive into a building to avoid like a dog or something, but then in the building there could be a bunch of school children. So that's something that kind of relates to the same thing. Something else is moving with a spouse and sacrificing a career, whether or not it's worth it to sacrifice an individual goal for the good of another person or for a family. And then the other one is with lying. If you're protecting a friend, if that's more important than giving correct information to a group that could cause potential harm